Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. Really psyched to be here talking about biology of token networks, which is something I've been focused on for some time. And also just wanted to start right off the bat with an invitation to collaborate if you're deeply interested in the space, in mechanism design, token design. Would love to connect with you afterwards. So just real quick, she gave me an intro, so I'll breeze over this. I'm a partner and head of crypto economics at Consensus Mesh. Focused on all of these things, design, treasury management, a number of things, all related to liquid tokens, and then of course, making new investments on behalf of our firm, as well as managing our existing portfolio, which is very sizable. We have around 175 positions currently, and a number of those are from historical, around about 7 years of investing in the space. If you're not familiar with us, we've incubated and invested in a lot of the most influential blockchain projects in the space, just tons of phenomenal teams building phenomenal products. So these are just a smattering of them. And one thing we've noticed over the years is all of those teams often struggle with how to design their token, do mechanism design, deal with monetary policy, distributions. There's a lot of factors to account for. And it's just common across every single project. But generally speaking, they all follow a broad system, right? You set out a goal, you understand what you're trying to achieve, you consider your constraints. Some of them are internal, some of them are external, and then of course you design mechanisms around those things to understand how can you achieve that goal. So if you're not familiar with this kind of like very broad framework, which was from Eddie Lazarin over at A16Z, I'll give you the example of Bitcoin. So they want to maximize network security. There's a couple constraints. They chose one Satoshi chose one of 21 million. Exogenous constraint of energy costs, and obviously this is not comprehensive. And then the main design being just proof of work. Mechanism being proof of work. And this is a really elegant solution to the problem of trying to secure a network, and it's worked obviously incredibly well over the past 15 years. And so what happens and what do we do when we want to solve more complex tokens? You get into a huge number of solutions. So here's a ton of frameworks. This is just a couple of them that exist for thinking through token design. So you may look at your token network that you're considering developing, and you view this landscape, these use cases or capabilities, and you say, all right, I'm an internal currency, but I also want to have a reputational element. And you can kind of understand where you are in the landscape of things, understand what other projects are doing similar things, and compare and contrast. And that's great. You can also run simulations, use CAD, use Token Spice, all of these different modeling tools. Look at analytics. You can read papers, of course. There's just like a huge body of work that you can pull on. But again, the problem is you have to absorb all that information, and you have to condense it and digest it, and then you just start making decisions, and it's frankly not easy. And so here's a slide with, there we go. The approach is flawed, and we know that because we're still iterating on this approach, and there's a lot of tools out there, but none of them are perfect yet. But I want to highlight today one key element that exists within every single token project that I think is really the core element of how we can move along much more quickly and move the space more quickly. Is this cutting in and out? It is, yeah. Okay. I don't think. Okay, cool. I don't think they're paying attention, so. Cool. So that element that's common to every single project is that they evolve or die. And that's the most critical element that I want to drive home, is the fact that every token project does this, right? And so we can look at an example of liquidity mining. Most people consider Compound as kind of like the father of liquidity mining. They kicked off DeFi Summer in 2020. There was actually a project called Fcoin that did it early in 2018, and they didn't design it properly, and they died. So that project, had wash trading and all of it. I think their trading volume shot up to like $17 billion. But all of it was just back and forth, across stable coins and things like that. And ultimately, people were just scraping the rewards out of the system, selling them, etc. And so that project died, and then you see this continued iteration and evolution of liquidity mining over time to where we are today, roughly speaking, with VE tokens, bribes, etc. And there's just ongoing elements. And I think the main thing to call out here in regards to those evolutions is that we still need, to my point, still need more work on this. And we need a universal language to document all these experiments that are being run, more visibility into the very specific mechanisms, the specific traits that are being passed along from generation to generation, and then just doing a better job of isolating the variables across all of these experiments. And that sounds ambitious, and I think it is, but it's why it needs to be, that's why I'm on the public good stage talking about it, because I think it needs to be an open project where many people are contributing. And luckily we have some lessons and some models that we can lean on. So biology is also a very complex system. We've more or less kind of quote unquote tackled this field in a very rigorous manner, in a scientific manner, of course. So what they did with biology is this guy, Carl Linnaeus, came up with a system. He named all of the species. Kings play chess on funny green squares, in case you remember it from elementary school. And now everything is much more structured, and scientists have a number of different benefits as a result of this system, right? Everything from Charles Darwin to your 8th grade science class is effectively built off of this. And so there's a universal terminology. There's ability to study the interaction between species and ecosystems and all this. And then obviously you can track survival of the fittest, all of which is very similar to what we're trying to do with token models. And so I just want to highlight the fact that, really I think one of the biggest elements of this is that we can better understand the evolutionary lineage of projects over time. And doing that, if you go back to the liquidity mining example, right? The biggest opportunity for learning from project to project is not when a project launches, it's not watching a project live with its analytics or whatever it might be. In my view, it's what happens between those projects and understanding what's changed from one generation to the next, right? It's why scientists choose fruit flies to study for a number of reasons, but because they reproduce very quickly and you can understand a number of iterations and monitor those very closely, within a few days' time. And I think that's kind of what we need to aim for as a space. So how do we do it? It's going to be complicated to some degree, but taking the compound example, this is quote unquote illustrative, but the original compound protocol, everything's baked into a smart contract, and what I'm suggesting is that we extract certain mechanisms out into distinct smart contracts. I love the nodding. And so being able to do that allows for a number of things, right? So suddenly now when you see just that very specific liquidity mining contract that's out there on its own, that's independent, and you're seeing people fork it, you're seeing different versions pop up, right? Kind of the family tree of what liquidity mining could look like versus a family tree of the compound contract, which bakes in so many other factors that it's hard to parse out what's driving the success of any given project. Suddenly you're able to see, again, that evolutionary tree start to evolve. And so now, this is, again, a rough example, but you would see that of version 11 being deployed into convex or deployed into another project. And then we could see that what is the reason that liquidity mining 7 through 10 failed, but 11 was the winner? Like, what is it that they tweaked and made more successful as a result? And again, it's kind of like great theory. How do we do this? Like, what's the reality? I don't want to just propose a bunch of theoretical solutions. And so we've started to work on this and collected the data around this, and this is kind of where the invitation to collaborate comes from. Currently, we're indexing existing mechanisms, so got a database of the top 100 projects, other notable projects, and we're tying the specific token design mechanisms to those networks so that we can understand very distinctly, here is the mechanism that's being used, here's how it's being used across different protocols, so that at least we're aligned on the nomenclature of how these networks are being designed. And then the second thing, beginning to tie different correlations or different success metrics to each mechanism. So using, again, is again illustrative, but the liquidity mining example, you have inflationary rewards. Compound has a TVL of just under 2 billion, and then Aave does a fee share. They have a TVL of 4.5 billion. So now you can compare two mechanisms side by side, seeing that one is obviously achieving what you would imagine the goal of these two protocols to be, which is TVL and locking up value and serving a larger, basically, market share. And then you do this, and you do it not just for two projects, but you do it for hundreds, right, over time. And ideally, statistically, you're able to see the correlations with which mechanisms are more successful and which versions are more successful, going back to that evolutionary tree. And there's some side benefits as well. As a result, you make mechanisms composable. So by pulling them out into distinct contracts, you now have the ability to, I think I have it in here, you're saving development time because you're just forking a specific mechanism. You can improve security, very similar to the Open Zeppelin ERC standards that they published. There were many eyes on a single implementation type of thing. It has the possibility of increasing resiliency. There's obviously a trade-off with upgradability and some security, security considerations there. But being able to swap out mechanisms, right? You can imagine a DAO voting to upgrade their protocol. It's not a ton of potentially coding and development time. You could potentially just plug and play a new mechanism that serves a similar purpose, but has different attributes or different traits. And then the biggest one, I think, honestly, is interoperability and understanding how multiple mechanisms can interact with each other. And so this is just an illustration of how scientists view organisms, and I think this is kind of a good North Star for us to get to in terms of tokens, right? It's a very distinct view of the species across the globe. You see rates of species birth. You can pack all this data in there. And we don't have this for token networks, despite the fact that all that data is available and on-chain. We don't have a great view from the bird's eye level of what mechanisms are being used, which ones are most successful, how often are they used across different protocols, how often are they being replicated or forked. All of this would be, in theory, possible, but we need to start somewhere, which is again, why I was proposing those first few steps. And luckily, just to kind of summarize, there is some momentum building around this, right? So you have an ERC standard that was proposed. I don't think it's been accepted yet, but this is a very similar process that Nick Mudge proposed in terms of like isolating different elements of a smart contract and pulling it out. So that multi-facet proxy is what he calls it. It's similar in concept, similar in execution, just a different kind of origin behind the thinking. Block Science Labs is doing some phenomenal work around their modeling. Six Man Ventures just put out a study that's really interesting around mechanism design, and really they were working to try to isolate very specifically which elements of different token models drive different outcomes. So there's a lot of work being driven around it, and I think what I want to propose and kind of drive home here is building a framework where we can collect all of that information and ultimately generate the insights out of it, so that it's not just a Medium post or a Mirror post, that you need to then absorb yourself and rinse and repeat, just back from the beginning of the presentation. So that's it. I mean, what's next in terms of how we can put this into action? Would love contributions to that database. If I do it myself, it's not going to be worth anything because it's just going to be somebody's opinion. But if everyone contributes, it's going to be, I think, massively valuable. And of course, please feel free to reach out. I'm on Twitter, Telegram, all of the platforms. Note one has an extra underscore. And would love to hear from you all. And thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it.